Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
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 Happy Friday.
Happy it is Friday.
Mm-hmm.
The jury's still out on whether it is a happy Friday.
Okay. So far, so good.
So far, so good. Yeah.
This means we have more time to work on the legislation over the weekend.
There's a lot going on there. A lot of iterations. Just add on top. Don't start a new version. That's all I request.
Oh, we have a whole new version we're sending over. Just kidding.
Thanks, Tom.
We are working on it. That was on a meeting at 8 a.m. this morning with Provost, and so hopefully we'll have something soon.
Good. That's
Excellent.
great. Appreciate it. All right. Well, we don't have a lot of time, and pretty sure everybody on camera here knows each other. We will save some time at the end of the meeting around 10:15. If members of the public are interested in making public comment, you could just send me or Jenna a chat, and we will get you in the queue for a few minutes to speak to the committee. Conversations during the meeting are going to focus among the team members on advisory committee members and OSU team and DSL teams. And again, we'll have public comment at the end, and always welcome your input via the project website, email lists, etc. With that, any questions? You should have the agenda, and we're going to have Shannon give us an update on progress and the process. We'll talk about public engagement. Michael's going to give an overview of public engagement on the FMP process and what's proposed and planned for that. We'll have a little bit of time to talk about landscape level modeling and the use of Lancet, and then we'll turn our attention to public comment, should anybody wish to make those, and we'll wrap up and get you out of here no later than 10:30. Any questions about the agenda? Otherwise, Shannon, I'm going to turn it right over to you. We'll jump straight in.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Let me just pull up a couple of slides. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. So as Peter mentioned, I wanted to give a brief update on the OSU team's progress over the last few weeks since we last met. And just a reminder of kind of the broad overview of what we presented last time on October 15th. There were three main areas where OSU is concentrating our efforts for scope of work between October 1st and February 1st. And those three are listed up here on this slide. Dedicated database and document repository is number one, monitoring plan development is number two, and forest management plan development is number three. So today I wanted to share some updates on the areas where we've been focusing our efforts over the past 3 weeks since we last met, specifically in the first and third categories. So the database management system, and then the forest management plan development. So on this first category of data management, there are two bullet points up here that were pulled from what we presented last time. And these are some of the major areas where we're working. So the first is to establish a framework for the database and repository dedicated to the Elliott State Research Forest. And over the past few weeks, we've had consultations with data management specialists, including those at the OSU Center for Quantitative Life Sciences and the Northwest Alliance for Computational Science and Engineering. And we've spoken with a variety of folks who have experience with setting up large database management systems, taking in different types of information, planning for long-term storage and access, and then also people who have kind of an eye to the future for where the technology is going, so that we can really take a holistic view of the type of system that we need to put together, and how to make it resilient for any changes that might be coming down the line in the future as we continue to come up with new research questions and have new technology come online. So we've been talking with a variety of people, and we're going to be continuing those conversations. Part of what's come out of those conversations is the second bullet point here, our goal of hiring or appointing a data specialist. And we're currently engaging with Hans Liu, who is an assistant professor at OSU and also works with the H.J. Andrews on their database management system and their web interface that's open to the public. And so we're hoping to work with Hans. We have a proposal to work with him as a key member of the data management planning team for the Elliott. And in that role, he would be a key person interfacing with some of these other specialists that we've been talking with, continuing to get their input, but also really taking the lead on the database design, both software and hardware, and how those two interact, and the web-based interface. So a couple of things that Hans would be doing with us would be to develop the database that meets the needs of the Elliott as we've defined them under that research proposal that was approved, and designing one that's resilient to the changing research needs and technological capabilities around the forest. He would work closely with researchers to determine the maintenance and growth needs of the database, and work on creating disaster plans so that we're making sure that if anything happens, we have backups for the data, that that the accessibility is maintained, and that we have long-term security of the data that would be coming in. So we're envisioning that Hans would work with others on this data management planning team. So that's the progress we've made over the past few weeks on that piece. And next, I wanted to move on to the forest management plan development, which was that third category. So there's 3 key bullet points here that we've been working on. The first is the proposed FMP scope and timeline, which would target a partial draft of key sections that we would present in December 2022. And we are in progress on this. We are planning to present our proposal for this FMP scope and timeline next month at the December 2021 DSL Advisory Committee meeting, and we'll be sending a hard copy or a digital copy for members of the committee to review ahead of time, and then comment on at that meeting when we present it. The second piece here is the FMP engagement plan. And once again, we're planning to present a more detailed version of this next month at the DSL Advisory Committee meeting. We also have Michael Collins from OSU College of Forestry here to talk today about an overview of our FMP public engagement strategy and get feedback from you all, and then use that feedback as we continue to refine that engagement plan ahead of next month. In addition to that, we have also been continuing to engage with stakeholders and specialists as part of our information gathering efforts. And so recently the OSU team met with Oregon Department of Forestry personnel who have experience on the Elliott. They met in Corvallis on campus. And we've also met with the Coos Watershed Association to kind of understand where their efforts are and what their plans are for the next few years, and build up our communication with them around areas where we may overlap. And then the third piece here is identifying several models to simulate processes key to management planning on the Elliott. We're in the exploration phase on this. We have spoken with multiple researchers, looked at the primary literature, and have explored a couple of different options for some models that we might use. And one of those will be discussed today, the LANDIS-II model for landscape level modeling. And we have Melissa Lukash and Neil Williams from University of Oregon here to present on that model and their experience and work with it. And this is a slide that we presented at our last meeting, but just wanted to bring it up again as a reminder for the types of expertise and specialties that we're looking for as we continue this progress. just based on what I've presented so far today, you can see that we're working on a couple of key areas right now: modeling, data, some of the carbon and global change with modeling. We've been talking with some people about as well as some of the landscape ecology pieces. And so we're continuing to work on bringing in stakeholders and specialists and people with different areas of expertise. As I mentioned last time, there is a group of research forest managers and directors that OSU had been speaking with starting at the beginning of this year. And we've been connecting with them and have a meeting set up with them very soon here in November. We are also working on a research plan implementation committee, and we've been reaching out to people to serve on that committee as well. We have the data management team that I discussed, where we're hoping to engage Hans to be a key member of that team. And we're working on defining the details of our scope of work and targeted points where we would want to seek additional expertise and experience. And we're continuing to refine that as well. And that's part of our scope and timeline that we'll be presenting in December. And just wanted to mention, from our last few weeks of conversations with people, there's been universal interest from everyone we've approached so far in becoming a part of this project, in offering their thoughts and their feedback. So that's been really exciting for our team. So a quick overview of next steps. We are continuing to work on the database management system. We're also continuing our consultations with researchers, stakeholders, and others with relevant expertise, as well as the RFQ for Coast Range forest management expertise. So those are some of our three main areas where we're focusing our efforts going forward in the short term. And then, as I mentioned, for next month's DSL Advisory Committee meeting, we are also going to have our proposed FMP scope and timeline for feedback, as well as the FMP engagement plan, which we'll be touching on a little bit today, and then having a deeper discussion on in December. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Peter.
Great. And before we go on to the next topic, maybe we'll see if anybody has any questions, comments on sort of the approach and work that's been happening over the last few weeks. Mark?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Shannon. That was a really helpful presentation and overview. Just a couple questions, and I apologize if I missed the last meeting, so some of this might be I've already stated previously, but when you're describing the database, I just wondered if you could give a little more flavor. I assume it's sort of a collection of all the baseline layers and sort of those kinds of layers that would be universal to almost anyone. I'm wondering, when you go, you also identified 9 buckets sort of for research there in one of the last slides. How much of that work where's sort of the line between, what a researcher would obviously be keeping on their own, or when does it go into the universal database, or how have you all thought about that?
It's a great question. So thank you, Mark. And I will answer. And then if Katie, if you have anything else to add as well from your perspective, please jump in. So with this database management system, we're really thinking of this as the repository for all of the baseline data coming off of the Elliott. And we're planning to set it up in a similar way, not identical to, but similar to what the H.J. Andrews has. So if you go on their website, they have a platform that's public facing where you can interface with the data. And that's what we're planning for the Elliott. So we do have some data already from GIS layers, from maps that we're digitizing, and other information that has come along with the Elliott. But then we also have LiDAR that's coming in as well, and new information. So what we're working on right now is looking at the information that we have, starting to put that into a framework, and Hans is working on that, but also thinking to the future about the types of data that we will be collecting in order to run the management of the forest, to set up the experiments that were outlined in the research program, as well as any room for future research questions that we might have coming in, and the data that is needed for the models that we're exploring as well. So I hope that answered your question at least a little bit. Katie, did you have anything else to add? Or Mark, is there anything else that you would want clarity on?
No, I think that gives a flavor for it, so that's helpful. Thanks.
And I'll just step in a bit. So there's different kinds of data. There's monitoring data. So you could example like, stream temperature data. Let's say we have deployed, stream temperature gauges in, I don't know, I'm just going to take a wild guess, 20 baseline streams or 20 streams, 5 from each treatment type or something like that. That data would be probably streamed live, and it would be something about, somebody wants to go fishing today, I'm going to go check the Elliott and see what stream temperature is, or, whatever the people's use might be for that. Other researchers from other parts of the world could download the data to use it to test. They maybe have a model that predicts stream temperature based on certain variables. They could go grab our data and use it to test their model to see how well their model predicted what the measurements are on the Elliott. So there's that type of data that's pretty common on research forests. Then there's also, and then there's individual researchers' data. So let's say I've designed a study and I've set it up and data's coming in. That data may or may not be made available immediately. And so because the person that wants to publish on that data, needs to have it embargoed for a long enough time that they can get their publications out and no one will scoop them, so to speak. But once that's done, then that data would also become available as data that was collected as part of the forest. And anyone who's working on the forest would agree to have their data be made public eventually, if not immediately. So that's pretty common in the research realm. But I'd say probably a vast majority of the data will be just available as soon as the QA/QC is done. And so.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Shannon. Bob?
Thanks, Shannon, for that overview. I have a couple of related questions, and again, apologies for not being there as well last week. I had an avoidable conflict too. I am concerned about the timeline on this. I know we're talking about getting key pieces of it in front of the land board prior to the turnover in January of 2022. To me, that's not really sufficient, to be honest. I really am concerned about the idea of running it before the land board in a piecemeal fashion. I think that makes it very, very hard for the public to be involved effectively when it's kind of a partial document that's not quite complete. We've run into this before in this process on several occasions, and it's been really counterproductive. And I do think it is important that we wrap this up in its entirety before this land board leaves. I think keeping that continuity is important. I know you're just entering this process and appreciate the challenges you must be facing. But we've been at this now for the better part of 3 years. And I think we owe it to ourselves and to the community to bring this process to a completion before the end of this land board. So that's my sort of first question comment is there any way to get this expedited in a way that allows us to actually have a final product for final approval in December of 2022? The second question I have pertains to key watersheds. We've been raising this since February of almost 2 years ago, that it's really important to the conservation community to walk through some of the key watersheds where we see the highest level of conflict. We haven't gotten to that yet, and we're hoping that can be expedited at the front end because we think that may affect the HCP and how that goes through. And we really need that data. So the second question is really, where does that fit in and what is the timeline for that? And I'll just say that just got more complicated with the news that Troy is leaving his work on the HCP. We're starting to run into this discontinuity because this is taking so long as well. So sorry to put you on the spot on that, but hopefully you can help me out with that a little bit.
Sure. So I would say to your second question about some of the key watersheds, it would be wonderful if we could talk a little bit more about where those watersheds are that you're kind of keying in on and what your concerns are and how those fit into the timeline. So maybe that's a conversation that we can set up after this meeting. As far as the overall timeline, we've been operating since the beginning on a 2-year timeline to put together the FMP. And that in itself was already pretty quick. I think we all completely understand that there have been a lot of delays throughout this process, and we all want to, bring this to a conclusion, but we also want to make sure that what we're doing is the best management plan that it can be, that we're really making sure that we're not cutting any corners as we're putting this together, because it will be one of the foundational documents for the research forest. So I completely understand your concerns about December 2022. And that's one of the things that we're working on with the scope and timeline and would love some feedback on as we're looking at the 2-year plan that we originally set out with. And really all we've done is move that to October 1st as our start date, because that's when the funding and the agreement came in to kind of do this next piece. But that's one of the things that we do want some feedback on from you all as we're continuing through this process. I would just say, we just want to make sure that we're not moving so quickly that we're not putting in the work and getting the information fully gathered together that we need to do the best job we can on this management plan.
Yeah, and Bob, I'd like to add also that, understand your concerns there, and but we have a tight schedule, and there's a certain amount of work that needs to happen in order to get this done and to meet that schedule. Our strategy regarding the HCP hasn't changed. The HCP sets the sideboards within which the FMP and research project will operate. And I understand your concerns with that, but we haven't changed that strategy, and we're not in a position to do so at this point.
Well, Bill, I'm going to take a little exception to that. We have said for 2 years that we needed to see the FMP before it went to the HCP and before you went to legislation. So we have been very clear, very explicit, and we've been told over and over again that it was going to be expedited. That didn't happen. We were told that it would be started in January of this year. It would be a priority. That didn't happen. So, respectfully, Bill, we're very uncomfortable with proceeding with locking in documents, transfers, and things like that, or structure without having that information. And we've been patient and respectful, but you're putting us in a position that's going to be untenable. And so we're looking for something more than simply saying, hey, we're behind schedule, just deal with it. We're looking for some real assurances, because my fear is we're not going to even get to what we're talking about, given the way we've been proceeding. So my hope is that we can think about strategies for getting a complete and coherent document before the Planning Commission, before the Land Board in December of 2022. And also that if we can't do that, that we have a very, very explicit set of deliverables that are tracked on a very clear timeline, so we don't wind up in this situation again, because it has happened too many times. And our support for the legislation that's going forward is contingent upon that. At this point, we've just been promised too many times that we would have information that was not delivered.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Understood.
Yeah, I first of all, we all want the same thing, Bob. We want to get this through the finish line, and we want it to be successful. I think your final comment about clear deliverables is something that is achievable, and there's a number of issues. Number one, having the HCP out in front may appear to be a problem, but in many regards, it helps inform the FMP process. And I think that it'll be to our advantage to have that. Had we moved forward with the FMP with incomplete data would only be readjusting along the way, and the HCP would be ultimately, it would have had to have sit on the back burner and would have, that process would have been pushed back. And then you'd be saying the opposite, would be in the situation where you'd be like, you've got to accelerate the HCP process. I feel like, well, I mean, okay, that may not be the case, Bob, but my point is that we've been working on this as a collaborative and iterative process. It's not a straightforward, just go write an HCP, write an FMP, and deliver it on this day. And because of complications associated with having multiple entities involved without, the clarity on ownership, all these factors have pushed back that timeline, and we will expedite it as much as possible, but we'll also do it absolutely right, not in a rushed fashion that's going to put us in a situation where you're like, well, what the hell is this? This is garbage. And, we want a really good product when we go forward. So having the right set, I think having a really clear set of deliverables is a totally reasonable expectation, and having the best possible set of, draft document possible for that date is going to be really important. But the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, is that if we make good progress on the legislative concept and get the legislation moved forward for establishing the ESRF public entity, that takes the pressure off the current land board hitting that time frame for the current land board. Not to say that we'll relax and not get it done, just that from as far as I can see, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, that legislation is going to dictate the shape and character of the ESRF entity. And that is what the land board that'll be the linchpin for decision-making on this entity by the land board, the current land board.
Thanks, Tom. Bob, did you have something else?
No, other than to say that we had no problem racing to get an HCP in when it served the state's interests, but now we're talking about making sure we do it right. I think we're using different standards depending on the priorities of the agencies involved, and this is important to us. This has always been important to us. This is the piece that we get to see most clearly how this is going to lay out on the landscape. And I think my frustration is clear that this is the piece that got put off for the longest and continues to get delayed. You knew in January of last year how important this was to us, and it has taken 10 months to get it going. That is unacceptable. So I want to continue the conversation, but I don't want to take any more time today. But it will inform how we go into this session and our support for this legislation in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Bob, thanks. Paul Beck.
I said this is the last meeting. I think I've said it at almost every meeting. You're talking details, Bob, little tiny details. The bulk of it is contained in the HCP that will dictate the forest management plan. The rest of it is contained in the research platform. And you can't do a management plan until you have those two things in place, because they will dictate everything. So trying to hurry and do something that you don't have a foundation for is foolish.
Well, I think it will be really helpful in the next conversation we have to better understand. And Shannon, I think I heard you saying that when this group next meets, we'll have a better sense of what would be done, what you anticipate to be completed in December of 2022, which and sort of the sequence of how various elements are going to roll out, and clearly a desire to move it as expeditiously as possible and as thoroughly as possible. knowing that both of those things are important and probably are going to consistently be in tension with one another. So, Bob, I appreciate your raising concerns about that and how the FMP sort of interfaces with the political process here. It's unusual in character for something like this and an important consideration. And Shannon, the clarity you and Tom have offered, as well as Paul, your insights into how the FMP is going to be developed as well and your experience on that. So let's keep in discussion. Shannon, I appreciate the overview and look forward to additional information at the next meeting. I think it will be really important and helpful for the group to better understand and calibrate its expectations. That said, Michael, why don't we have you talk a little bit about the public process and what the university is expecting for that?
Yeah, thanks. It's probably a little similar to the themes that we have been sharing right now, but I think the general plan is for us to have an approach similar to what we did at the start of the Elliott process. And so, at the start, OSU hosted numerous kind of public engagement sessions and stakeholder meetings. And I think our idea is to kind of invite everyone from our and DSL stakeholders list to these sessions, as well as promote with the public. And we'll use the input from these sessions to be considered as components of the management plan as it's developed. And so I think we're planning on doing kind of these engagements within kind of small group settings with stakeholders, as well as kind of large in-person community meetings where the entire public is invited to attend. And our hope is to host these in communities surrounding the Elliott, as well as Portland and Corvallis, again, similar to the meetings we held at the start of the process. And hopefully as well at those meetings, thanks to the pandemic, we became experts at hosting them in hybrid formats to try to get there as much people to these sessions as possible. So these engagement session opportunities will take place, at key points throughout the process. And I know one of the questions we had for the group today was what parts within these process would the engagement opportunities be most meaningful? And it certainly sounds like from just what Bob was saying that, when we have some sort of deliverables available for the public to look at and engage with, that those would be key moments. And then finally, kind of just as information, we'll have a forest management planning page on our website, and the page will list kind of ongoing, future, and past activities in relation to the forest management plan. And we'll also obviously provide information about how the public can engage and ask questions. And so, I did want to pose that one question to the group is when do you think these engagement sessions would be most meaningful for your constituents and other stakeholders in the public? And also just to toss out there, if you have any stakeholders or constituents that you'd like to be sure that we formally invite to these sessions, feel free to reach out to anybody on the OSU team. We'll make sure we'll have that contact information and make sure that they're included in those invites. And then, as we've discussed already, we'll probably have a more formal timeline, deliverables, and engagement kind of proposal for that December meeting to discuss.
Thanks, Michael. Comments or questions from the group?
I also want to add one other thing that we've been talking about quite a bit as well is we don't want public engagement just from the standpoint of, here's what we're doing, what do you think? It's more also we want public engagement from what are the pieces of information we need to know going into it. Bob brought up, some of the input that he has provided, and I appreciate that continued continuity that, Bob has provided as all the advisory committee members have provided, that we can say, yeah, we see where there's problems in certain watersheds and how do we address them? And so, but there's also people that are coming forward and saying, hey, you know what, we have this data, we have this, bridge plan that was done in the past, and we'd like to share that with you, or we have some salmon recovery plans for different treatments in the West Fork of the Millicoma or other streams, and we'd like to share those with you. And that really helps us because it does put some stakes in the ground. It puts some things that we need to incorporate into this kind of multiple interactive ecological processes and social processes that are going on around the Elliott that are all part of our management planning. So I think we're going to have, you know, groups of people also that will be providing some substantive input based on their experiences on the Elliott that we want to capture. And that includes cultural and anthropological, can't say the word this morning. And that we have that information going into this planning, and that takes time to ferret those out, to get them into a database, get them spatially oriented, temporally oriented, so that we can move forward. And so whether it's, you know, fish presence or absence, or whether it's you know, cultural sites that are important to certain people, whether it's the bridges that need to be looked at or potentially repaired, all those need to feed in so that we can do a management plan that hopefully doesn't have mine traps in it that we can't anticipate. So that social engagement piece of this is more of in a collaborative fashion than just a listen to what we have to say fashion. So I think where you can help us develop that, either by identifying people we should be collaborating with that we're missing. That's why we're sharing you the list of kind of who we've talked to recently. And if you're starting to say, hey, you're missing some important people, we'd like to hear that, because that's, I think we think of it as more than just delivering a product, but instead sharing a product. So.
Thanks, Katie. Anything else on engagement? Yeah, Colin?
Yeah, so thanks. First of all, I think OSU and DSL has done a really good job of engaging a diverse group of stakeholders in this. I also think there's a large local community here that you know, is directly going to be affected by management of the Elliott. They recreate up there, they have livelihoods that are directly affected by management of the Elliott. I think a lot of those people, you know, have not really been included in this and don't feel included in this. They're not, you know, they work full time, they have families. They're not members of Audubon or Douglas Timber Operators or Oregon Hunters and Anglers. They don't have time to come to workshops, you know, at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And, you know, honestly, I think a lot of people really feel disenfranchised, even if they did have time to participate. I don't think a lot of them would, because, you know, over the past 20 or 30 years, they just feel like their voices are drowned out and not listened to. And I think making those people feel like they're being listened to and heard is going to be really important in getting local buy-in into management of the Elliott as a research forest. And I really don't know what the solution is to that, but I'm just curious if that's something you guys are thinking about, and if you have any ideas on how to re-engage those people.
Alan, let me start off by just saying thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a really, really good and important point. It was interesting. I was out on a field visit to some old research sites that had burned in the Holiday Farm fire. And I was out with, among other people, Bernard Borman, who's been working on the OESF a project out there on the Olympic Experimental State Forest, and it's a large scale thing that we started when I was at Washington, started working on it. It was a very, very slow process, and we were catching up on how everything was going. And he said what was so important to the success of this project was engaging with local stakeholders. And he said, you really need to get out and spend time, your team, the OSU team needs to get out and spend time engaging with people locally that have a very deep and invested stake in the future of the Elliott. So I was asking him about how, of course, in his case, the UW has a facility that is on site right out in the middle of that. It's a little facility out in Forks called the Olympic Natural Resource Center, and that's where Bernard is stationed. And so that facilitates that interface, and that will be the intent if we have a facility at Shutter Creek or a facility at the forest is the intent, or at Shutter Creek, and that'll greatly facilitate that interface. But being so distant right now, you're absolutely right. We need to make an effort to work with people locally, and we haven't done a good job of that yet. And I'm open, and as is our team, to ideas or suggestions on how to best accomplish that.
Thanks, Colin, for raising it, and Tom for the response. Any other thoughts on engagement? Helpful advice and a reminder, I think, of Michael's comment that your suggestions going forward, and at any point of individuals or organizations or mechanisms or opportunities to do outreach and engage with the community, engage with other constituencies, would be welcomed, and obviously going to be a critical part of seeing this element through. So, all right.
Peter, Ken here. I want to jump in real quick and say that, organizationally, the outfit I work with, we have, 26 chapters scattered around the state. And we've tried our best within OHA to kind of reach out to the local chapters that we have. And really the only one that we've got there in the general area is the Tioga chapter, which is basically Coos Bay. And there's roughly 300 members in that group, and the word kind of gets out and about. But we would be very interested in any ideas other folks have that we can reach out. And I think really probably at the base local level, the best opportunity any of us have, in this conversation is to reach out to our local constituencies. And it's been said already that we collectively here know people in the communities, and those folks have jobs, they have recreational needs, they have things they do, and whether that's a Sunday go to church thing and chat a little bit, or a Friday night at the bar and chat a little bit, just kind of through that informal network is probably the best option that we have, at least that I can think of right now. Is an awful lot of what we see in the media, whether that be mainstream media or social media, just hits a few people and typically just starts rumors and whatnot. But I think just that local outreach. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ken. Colin, did you have something else?
Yeah, I did. I just had a more specific follow-up question with regards to consultation and coordination with the tribes. I believe that the services were going to initiate a formal consultation with regards to the HCP, and I was just wondering if you had an update as to what the timing on that might be. And then I also, I think that now that we're getting into the development of the forest management plan, which is going to cover some things that are going to be pretty important to the tribe and tribal members, such as recreation, cultural resources, cultural plants. those sorts of things. I'd like to have a conversation about the best way to get the tribe involved in that. You know, my expertise is in forest management. We have a lot of people here, both staff and tribal members, who have a lot of knowledge with regard to cultural resources, you know, both archaeological resources and plant animal resources on the forest that you know, I think we need to engage those people in the development of the FMP.
Thanks, Colin. Any response to anybody have a sense, or Tom, maybe you were going to weigh in there, and then I was curious if somebody had a sense, Bill or Katie or anybody who's working more closely on the HCP and might have a sense of consultation timeline.
I was just going to follow up to say that that's a great recommendation and one that we'll follow up on for sure. But with regard to the HCP, I'll let Bill or Katie respond.
Yeah,
Bill?
Katie, do you have a thought on that? I'm sorry, I was on another thought train at that point.
The HCP part of the consultation, the process, I have not been involved in as much. I don't see Jeff on the call because he's, but Peter, you might know.
Jeff's on vacation. I'm sorry, what was the question? I'm sorry, I was responding to a chat.
Timeline for consultation on the HCP with the tribes, formal consultation.
I am not sure on that. I know we have offered to consult with the tribes, and we have consulted with the tribes over the overall process, early on. Haven't had a recent consultation with them. We can certainly reach out again to see if there's additional interest. I know that the tribes often have capacity challenges as well, and so but we can definitely look into that. I did want to also address Bob chatted me about the HCP and Troy's departure. I don't see that affecting the HCP process significantly. Melissa Klingel is going to be taking over for Troy, and she's been part of the project, been his assistant all along, and so she knows the nuts and bolts and is very effective. And so I don't anticipate huge challenges or any challenges really with that. I mean, Troy is really great and really enjoyed working with him, but I think we'll be able to be successful moving forward on that. But we can definitely follow up regarding travel consultation regarding the HCP. I haven't heard anything recently. It's possible that Jeff has. He's actually taken a well-deserved vacation this week, and that's why he's not on the call.
Well-deserved and ill-timed.
They're always ill-timed, aren't they?
I think that'd be great, Bill. If you could be point on that in terms of coordinating. Colin, I interpreted from your question and comment that there would probably be an interest on the part of the Klutzi, and that there's also engagement with the federal services in that consultation, Bill, because of the HCP nexus would be important, and sort of coordinating that so that it's not multiple engagements around consultation, but a single engagement might be preferable.
Well, definitely preferable, not always possible.
Right. Good. Well, thanks for being point, and Colin, thanks for raising it. All right. Shall we turn our attention to landscape level modeling? I think we have Melissa and Neil here to talk with us about it. And much like last time, where we talked about LiDAR and updating you all on the status of that data and potential uses for the information, I think this is another opportunity to learn about sort of the approach and some of the information that's going to be utilized in FMP development, and give you a flavor of that. It's a tip of the iceberg, but I want to make sure that during these meetings, particularly right now as we're planning and a lot of the data and sort of inventorying of the information is happening, it's feels relevant and important to give you a sense of how different tools are going to be used or could be used, so that we can hit the ground running once that exercise is underway or those exercises are underway. So with that said, Shannon, do you want to, you or Katie want to do anything by way of introduction?
I don't know that Melissa and Neil are on the call yet.
Ah, okay.
I think they had another meeting right up till 10 o'clock.
All right. Wow.
I have another question in the meantime. There was a draft of the FMP outline that went out maybe a month or two ago for comments and feedback. I was just curious if there was an updated version of that that'll be circulated.
Next month during the advisory committee meeting, when we're presenting that updated scope and timeline for feedback, we can include that table of contents, that draft, I think that you're talking about, Colin. And I think those will dovetail really nicely. And at that point, if there's any additional questions or feedback that this group has, I think that would be a good time.
Thanks.
Katie, did you have something else? If not, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to do a brief introduction on some of the benefits of a landscape model. That might be a good introduction, but if you have something else in mind, then go ahead and.
No, I think that would be great. I'd like to use the time as efficiently as possible. So let's, why don't you do the introduction? If they're not on yet, when you're done with your introduction, we'll take a 2-minute break and then come back and we'll restart at 10. So go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, I just know that many of you realize that these landscapes that we work in have multiple interacting ecological processes and human level processes that are operating at big spatial scales, small spatial scales, short-term and long-term. And these interactions of all these different components create tremendous complexity and make it really difficult to make predictions of the future and based on actions that we do today. And so one of the things in the research realm that we've really tried to work on is how do we do that better than we've done it in the past? I don't think we've done it well in the past. And I think a lot of the issues we deal with today are a function of that. Sorry, I have a cat that's going to come in here and attack me. But anyway, so but the ability to do that has been reflected in several of what we call these landscape models. And the one that we're going to talk about today, which you'll get a broader introduction, is called LANDIS-II actually, and it's been used widely. And I think they'll probably talk a little bit more specifically about the LANDIS model. We're very lucky to have some folks at U of O that are highly experienced in using this model and have already done some work to kind of set the model up for the Oregon Coast Range. And so those are two big benefits. But one of the things is that these models can do is they can operate at a scale that's relevant to many forest management issues and problems, as well as many issues dealing with habitat. They can provide different ways of looking at the forest outside of just the wood production, but you have that ability to consider wood production as a trade-off and potentially with habitat for certain species or with water quality and quantity or water temperatures. So there's all these abilities to look both forward and be able to predict, if I do this today, this is what it would look like potentially in 40 years or 60 years. And so it gives us that window. And I often wonder what different decisions people would have made in the past if they had a window into the future that we're dealing with today. So kind of think about them in that way. They also account for all these interactions. So one of the things that you never know is about these levels of interactions that can occur. And it's the interactions not just amongst the ecosystem, cut down the trees, the water temperature might go up. But it's also the human dimension of that can be brought in as well. So how does that change human behavior? How does that change the desirability of humans to recreate in an area? So there's all these different interacting effects that can occur. So I see that the experts on this, Melissa and Neil, are on. So I think we can possibly, if it's okay, I can just switch to my introduction to you guys a little bit and then let you take over. Are you ready, Melissa? You can shake your head if you guys are.
I'm good.
Okay, good. All
And
right.
as we are transitioning here, just a reminder, if any members of the public that want to make public comment, if you could send me or Jenna a note so we can plan accordingly on the timeline, that'd be really appreciated. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Go ahead, Katie.
Okay, so I appreciate Melissa and Neil to take a break out of the other meeting that they're attending right now to kind of squeeze in to be able to talk to us. But Melissa is a research assistant professor at the University of Oregon, and this illustrates the collaborative nature between OSU and U of O, and that we're willing to go to where the expertise is. And we're just so lucky to have somebody with the expertise that Melissa has. Neil is an incoming postdoc with Melissa in the lab who did his PhD with Matt Powers here in the College of Forestry. So he's familiar with the Elliott, which is also another real benefit to having this team come in to consult with us and to work with us. So with that, I'll let you guys take it away so I don't take any time away from you in your presentation. So.
Thanks, Katie. Neil and I are excited to be here. We're attending the Wildfire in the West workshop. Can you go back to the original one now, the first slide? And yeah, so we're excited to be here. I did my master's at OSU, so any opportunity to collaborate with OSU is something I always like to pursue. Let's see. So, it's getting us going with our landscape modeling. I'm just going to give a brief 5 to 7 minute introduction to LANDIS-II, which is the model that we plan to use. And yeah, can you put it in presentation mode? Oh, he's trying. Okay. Talk about LANDIS-II, and then Neil will switch over and talk with modeling in the Elliott. Neil, would you rather I do it? Okay, stop sharing. Okay. Usual Zoom technical. I will. Let's see here. My screen, and I'm here. That. We good? Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about landscaping modeling that we're hoping to do in the Elliott. Both myself as a research assistant professor, like Katie said, and Neil Williams, who's a postdoc in my lab right now. He's doing a NSF, he's working on an NSF project to look at wildfire in Siberia right now. So I'll just talk a little bit about why I think LANDIS-II is an appropriate model to use in the Elliott State Forest. And I'll just walk through these sort of 5 components, and these are specific to why I think they, the real strengths of the model. So one is that LANDIS-II it's widely used and decentralized. I will talk a little bit about how it simulates species and carbon and how the model can be used to translate into maps of habitat suitability for birds and mammals. I'll talk a little bit about how the model, it's really foundation is our ecological understanding of tree species and shrub species, that it's a spatial model. It doesn't just, simulate forests as one big sort of square or blob, and that it has this really flexible architecture that lends itself well to simulating really complex prescriptions of forest management. Let's see, so LANDIS-II has been around for a long time. It's been around for more than 30 years. It was started at University of Wisconsin-Madison by David Mladenoff, but it continues to grow and change, which is sort of my last point about flexible architecture. But it's been around for quite a while, but we still have 1,400 users. In fact, we have a training that's going on right now. We hold trainings twice a year with about 20 new users. So we basically add, just from the trainings alone, 40 new people who are using the model. In my lab alone, we have 4 people who are using LANDIS, lots of developers. And it was designed at its very core to be a decentralized model, not to be monolithic. It was designed to be transparent. It's open access, it's free. Anyone can use it, anyone can view the code. So we were really trying to break those stereotypes of models where they were owned by someone, and it was hard to see how it actually operates. So improving transparency and decentralizing the model. One of the other real advantages of using LANDIS is that it's simulating individual species. And we think, well, that makes obvious, right? Many of us are field people or work people, or spend time a lot of time in the field, and we think, like, of course we focus on tree species. But the reality is lots of models lump species together in types or forest types. So on the left there, you see a really common model used in the West. And that you can see here in the legend that you have woodlands, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and even someone who works in the system. I'm not really sure what that is. I have to read the paper to remember and understand what those are. And then there's some exotic grass. We can guess what that is, cheatgrass. And then we have different types of shrub stuff. So we don't necessarily know exactly what those species are. They get lumped together. And LANDIS doesn't do that. LANDIS simulates individual species. So this is a project that I had in the upper Midwest, and I think we had 37 different species in that system. And so it's really flexible in the fact that you can lump species if you want. So you could use the approach on the left, but in reality, it really operates best when you're simulating individual species. And that's really, what many of us care about. We don't care about just pines in general or oaks in general. We're really focused on individual species and how they might respond under different scenarios of management and climate. The other thing that LANDIS allows us to do is to then crosswalk over and create maps of habitat suitability. We've done that quite a bit in the past. An example on the left is a project funded by DoD that we finished up, where we translated model output, made projections about how these, in this case, longleaf pine would change under a hot, wet climate scenario, and then translated that using boosted regression tree, sort of machine learning technique to see how that affected red cockaded woodpecker habitat. And similar things have been done with fishers with LANDIS. The graph on the right shows, the number of adult females of fishers over time. And so that's one of the advantages of using this kind of model, where you can then crosswalk it and answer questions about biodiversity, not just of trees and shrub, but of mammals and birds as well. LANDIS is built on this foundation of life history strategies and attributes. And I think this is one of the real assets of LANDIS, that it relies on all these things that we already know about these species. We know if it's shade tolerant or intolerant. We know how long it lives. We know something about how fire tolerant it is. We know when it starts producing viable seeds. So because it's operating at the species level, we're able to feed in these characteristics that we know from many years of research and natural history work about how these species operate. And these feed into the model and help make the projections about how these species will change in the future. LANDIS, like I said before, it's not, sort of one cell, one block. It's really a, raster grid. It's a matrix of these different cells. And so it's a spatially explicit model, which just means it makes maps. It's a spatially dynamic model. It changes over time. You feed in different climate scenarios or management scenarios, and those cells will change over time. And it's also spatially interactive, which you think, well, that makes sense, right? Fire spreads, the cells should interact with one another. That's not always the case. There's lots of models which really simulate fire on one pixel, and then they simulate fire on the other, the pixel next to us independently, and the fire doesn't actually spread. But that's not true in LANDIS. LANDIS simulates fire spread, and the sort of figure on the right shows like F is supposed to be like a focal cell, and you can see the fire in this case could spread with the arrows to a neighboring cell. But if you were simulating dispersal of trees, you don't have to, it doesn't have to move to the adjacent cell. You know, lots of species, right, that are wind dispersed where they transmit long distances. So it's spatially interactive, but it doesn't have to be adjacent cells. So you can have cells from, you know, one area, skip a couple cells, and have trees regenerate in a nearby cell that's not necessarily adjacent. So making maps change over time, as well as these cells interact with one another. Another advantage of LANDIS is that it's spatially interactive. So you can have lots of these different disturbances operating on the landscape, and they interact with one another, which Katie had mentioned earlier. And I think that's one of the values too. We know that disturbances interact with one another, and LANDIS is able to capture that. And my final slide before I switch over to Neil is just to highlight the fact that there's this wide array of possibilities that, and that LANDIS has this very flexible architecture. So there's lots of different extensions that you can, or modules you can use of LANDIS. You can simulate harvesting on the left. You can simulate what it would take, what the landscape would look like if they installed more roads. So that's a road simulator. Wind, which is of course important in the Coast Range, as well as wildfire. We also do prescribed fire. So lots of possibilities with, you know, what would this landscape look like if we reintroduced indigenous burning? All these things are possibilities within LANDIS. I'll turn it over to Neil.
Melissa. So another of the advantages of using LANDIS on the Elliott is that although the Elliott is, what, 91,000 acres, we think that's fairly large, but by the standards of most LANDIS simulations, that's actually a fairly small landscape. And because LANDIS allows you to vary the cell size, Melissa showed the raster grid before, we can vary the size of each of those cells. And that affords different levels of spatial accuracy or spatial resolution in the simulation and the outputs. And because the Elliott is a relatively small landscape by LANDIS standards, that allows us to get some fairly high spatial resolution in our simulations. So we probably have cells that were about 10 meters by 10 meters in width and height. Another advantage of the relatively small landscape is that we can use lots of different simulation runs. We can replicate the simulations many times fairly rapidly, and that allows us to explore lots of different scenarios. We might want to explore different climate change scenarios, or we might want to explore different harvest allocations. And that's all going to be possible because the landscape is actually relatively small. Although, having said that, if we were to simulate certain processes like fire, we'd probably want to actually use a slightly larger landscape so that we can simulate the effect of fire spread into the landscape, which we know obviously happens in real life. If you could go to the next slide, please, Melissa. So on screen, we've just made up a little cartoon that illustrates some of the extensions that we might want to use for working in the Elliott. Melissa showed the table of all of the different extensions that are possible to use with LANDIS, and these act like plug and play modules that you would just add into the core model. And the core of that would be a succession extension that models how forests grow and develop and how trees die over time. And that would be, we've chosen DGS succession, which is particularly suitable for modeling regeneration of tree seedlings following harvesting or natural disturbance. We can then add in an extension, or we can add in various different climate change scenarios using something which we call Climate Library. And this may be running historical climates, or it may be adding in various different climate change scenarios that we could import. And then you'd have lots of different disturbance extensions, and harvesting is probably the most important of these, given the proposals on the Elliott to try out the triad approach. But we would also want to consider using wind disturbance, which we know is important in coastal forests, and also wildland fire, which we could include, as Melissa mentioned, we could include either wildfires or fires that are human originated, for example, prescribed fire or indigenous burning. And then Landis includes lots of different output extensions, and one or two that we would want to use on the Elliott, which would be particularly important, are local and landscape habitat output, which convert the standard biomass-based Landis outputs into a variety of different forms for exploring how our simulation outputs would be useful for different species of interest. You could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So over the next slides, I just wanted to dive in a little bit further into how we might simulate harvesting in the Elliott, given the importance of that in the triad system that is proposed. And we would use something called biomass harvest extension, which is particularly suitable, I think, for the proposals that have been set out, because it has a spatially hierarchical structure that allows us to nest stands within management units or sub-watersheds, as they would be on the Elliott, and then to implement a variety of different treatments at different spatial scales. Could you move to the next slide, please? So, for example, each of the sub-watersheds that have been designated in the proposals for the Elliott would be assigned to, or would be configured as independent management units within the harvest extension. And individual management units can be assigned different prescriptions, or we could synchronize prescriptions between different sub-watersheds as we choose. We would, for example, set aside all of the conservation research watersheds, remove them completely from the harvest base, except if, for example, we wanted to include any thinning treatments in young plantations, as has been proposed. So we'd set those aside, and then we would take the management research watersheds out, and we can implement individual prescriptions in each of those. Could you move to the next slide, please? So within each of these management units in the management research watersheds, we could then assign individual stands with different harvest treatments. We might, for example, assign stands that have been initially designated as intensive management. We'd treat those with a clear cut. For the extensive harvest treatment stands, we would implement something like a patch cut, or we could use a retention harvest or a thinning treatment, depending on what we wanted to examine. And then we could still, within these managed watersheds, we could still set aside chunks of the land base to prevent any harvesting occurring during the simulation runs, which would be akin to the no harvest reserves in the management research watershed. Could you move to the next slide, please? So this is a little cartoon of a landscape. Each of these colors represents a different stand. And I wanted to just show how flexible the Landis harvest extension is to play around with different treatment scenarios. So if you could move to the next slide, please, Melissa. You just click.
Sorry, my computer's having some issues. There we go.
So we could, if we wanted to, we could remove the entire stand if you click again, and that would be akin to a clear cut. If you move through the slide again. Then we could remove individual cells within that stand to simulate a patch cut. And then if you click again, then within each individual cell on the landscape, we can also remove individual, or we could remove chunks of the biomass within that. cell, which would simulate something like thinning, or if we removed most of the biomass, it would be a retention harvest with fairly high levels of removals. And then you could go to the next slide, thank you. And an important part of using Landis on the Elliott, I think, would be in using lots of different simulations to explore how we might want to assign treatments to stands within each management research watershed. The initial allocation of treatments, I understand, has been based on certain specific criteria. We could use Landis to refine those allocations of stands to treatments. And we can use a variety of different automated criteria, or we can set criteria ourselves. But the automated criteria that we could use include based on age, or we could assign stands treatments based on economic objectives or fire hazard. So we can then explore look at the outputs and then think, are these initial treatment allocations correct? Could we do better by shifting different stands into different treatments? Next slide, please. And finally, I just wanted to talk about the riparian conservation area or the utility of Landis for looking at riparian conservation area strategies. And in the proposals, there are a variety of different buffer widths that have been suggested for use on the Elliott. If you skip to the next slide, please, Melissa. And we could fairly easily simulate the effects of different buffer widths on various ecological processes simply by having different numbers of cells on each side of every water course, Elliott, and then look at the results in terms of nutrient cycling, for example, or biomass, or whatever we wanted to do. Next slide. So just in summary, Landis is a dynamic, spatially explicit modeling suite. We think it's particularly useful on the Elliott because it can simulate lots of different disturbance processes, climate change. The results can be transformed into wildlife habitat suitability outputs. And we can, for the size of the landscape, we can do lots of different simulation replicates in a reasonably short period of time, particularly because at the University of Oregon, we have access to supercomputing facilities that allow simultaneous processing of lots of different simulations. And finally, it's very flexible to allow for different harvest prescriptions and tailoring prescriptions based on the results of individual simulation runs. And that's all we have, Katie. We have time for questions if you want to.
Yeah, any questions or comments from the committee? Well,
you put us right before the break.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it looks like Colin had one question, and I will say before Colin asks his question or makes his comment, it is really fun to see the tools that are going to be used on the Elliott, and I think folks are going to be increasingly excited to see how this works and the outputs and the way the tools are going to be used. So thanks for being here and making the time. Colin?
I was just curious, does this model incorporate its own growth model, forest growth model, or does it use output from a separate existing growth model such as FPS or FBS?
Yeah, so Landis is its own model. You would feed in maps of where the current road network is now, because you won't want to simulate forests on those roads. There is a separate extension of Landis that's a road simulator. We were planning to use that here, unless that's something in particular that you'd be interested in. I would guess not. But FES is a separate forest growth model, and that model is designed more as a growth and yield model to simulate sort of maximum growth and maximum productivity. And Landis is a model that's really designed to make projections about what actually might happen, in the sense that it's realized growth and not sort of a maximum or a potential growth like FPS.
Thanks, Melissa.
I just wanted to say one more thing that I think Landis can, or any landscape model can be really helpful for is really as a vehicle for collaboration amongst decision makers and resource experts and the public and scientists, because it provides a scenario that says, if we do this, we think this will happen. So for example, we have a big part of extensive forestry, about 13,000 acres off the top of my head, somewhere in that neighborhood of extensive forest treatments, where we'll be doing a variety of retention levels that are really there to simulate historic and potential future disturbance regimes, and how that some people call it ecological forestry, we call it extensive, but how that plays out on the landscape is something that's in people's minds. But how do you put that into thinking on the ground, into a look in the future of that? If we do it like this, this is where we'll end up. But if we do it like this, we'll end up here. And those places where you'll end up might be based on the structure for endangered species. It might be the economic framework for local mills and what their output, what outputs would be coming their way. What would be the age class structure of those stands? Is it going to be, 3 or 4 age cohorts, or are we going to have just a single age cohort that, how successful is the regeneration going to be? It provides that ability to simulate all those processes and to give you outputs that gives you that ability to discuss lots of different options as you go forward into a planning process. And I think that's a really highly valuable component. And it's not just that we believe all the output in LANDIS either. We realize that most models give you an answer because you've asked them to do that. And you're hoping they're doing it on the best information possible, but you have to run tests. And then you set up a monitoring protocol that helps you describe, are we going in the direction we think we're going in? And if not, why not? And then that monitoring helps you improve your modeling. And over time, you develop something that you have more trust in and you think is responsive to both climatic effects and change, as well as to more static things that don't change readily on a landscape. So I think that piece of it, that ability to provide something that we can look at, that we can all then discuss about the outcomes and then make a decision, is that framework is a really critical part because of that lens it gives us into a potential future. So
yeah, I guess I could just chime in and say, right, in my 7 minutes, I didn't really talk about validation and how we evaluate model performance and decide that it's operating the way we think that it's operating right now. That makes sense. But our lab does a ton of work behind the scenes in terms of validation. It's sort of disappointing. It all ends up in some sort of like supplemental, on somebody's, online that very few people read, but we do spend an inordinate amount of time on our calibration and validation side of the model. And yeah, like Katie said, there's a huge value to these models where you can do these scenario comparisons, these what if scenarios. Because of course, some of them we don't, we're curious to see and we want to know how that will play out on the landscape. We may not want to actually implement it on the field, on the ground. And we want to see what those would look like if we implemented those scenarios. We had a project in the upper Midwest in central Minnesota where we're interested in climate suitable planting. What would happen if we planted these various southernmost species? Would they migrate? How much planting would we have to do? And we simulated a bunch of different species. And I think that's an example of, it's not something that the Forest Service was ready to do at that time, but they were really interested and curious as to what it would take to do more climate suitable planning and how that would play out across the landscape. And those are the kind of things that we can do, all different scenarios of management, climate, and then how they interact, as well as wind disturbance, and how they interact and spatially play out across the landscape over time.
Great. Thanks, Melissa and Neil. Appreciate your time. And We have one member of the public, Francis. I think you had a public comment you'd like to make in our closing minutes, and then Shannon, maybe we can have you wrap before we conclude. Go ahead, Francis.
Well, okay. Thank you for this opportunity. You know, I think it's important to the public, actually important to me, to be able to see a draft of the forest management plan as early as possible. You know, we need time to digest it and provide feedback. For instance, you know, I have a particular interest in how the forest management plan will deal with endangered species that were not addressed in the habitat conservation plan. So, you know, I was looking forward to seeing this forest management plan soon. Do you have the projected date of the first complete forest management plan for the public?
Thank you for that question, Francis. We are going to be presenting a more detailed scope and timeline and what we anticipate we'll have for the key forest management plan draft sections. We'll be doing that at the December 2021 advisory committee meeting. So that may help answer some of your questions and give you more details to kind of dig into about where we're going with that roadmap.
So the first complete public draft would be soon after December?
We have in our planning 2 years total for the entire process and putting together the development of the forest management plan. So we won't have a draft after December, but we will have the more detailed roadmap of which sections we're planning to have drafts of when and how all this information is being brought together.
When will the draft of the endangered species, not addressed in the habitat conservation plan, what is that in the timelines? Like for instance, the coastal martin, and there's others too.
So those sections of the FMP, that's what we'll be detailing next month at our committee meeting of which of those key sections we're planning to have ready for draft and when.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the questions and the encouragement on the timing, Francis. We heard both of those, so appreciate you being here. As we wrap up, any closing thoughts? If not from the committee, then Shannon, maybe I'll give you the last word here in wrapping us up.
Sure, thank you, Peter. So I just wanted to wrap up today by thanking everyone for your questions and comments as always. I also wanted to thank Michael Collins for presenting the public engagement plan process that we're working on, as well as Melissa Lukash and Neil Williams for presenting the LANDIS-II model and their work and what they see as the opportunities for applying that landscape level model to the Elliott. And just wanted to continue to encourage everyone to be in conversation with us. We really appreciate your feedback and your comments as we continue on this process. And particularly as we head into this next December meeting where we're going to be having the proposal for the full engagement plan and the scope and timeline for the FMP. It's really critical that we have your insights in those proposals, as well as identifying specific groups and mechanisms, as Peter said, that we need to make sure we're including in our engagement plans. So there are a couple of threads from the conversation today that we'll be following up with you all on. But if there's anything else that we didn't discuss today, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks all. Have a lovely rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.